Welcome, one and all, to the Success Curious podcast. It's your man, Andy, here, and I am absolutely honored to have someone that I've been connected to for a wee while, but have been an admirer of for even longer. Bill Nikolouszakis is that right?
Perfect, mate. That was
Yes,
super perfect.
Get in. Bill is one of the more respected business individuals, leaders, thought leaders in Melbourne, if not Australia. He is an amazing character that has been building businesses since he was 21 years old. Been an entrepreneur since he was 20. No, so by the looks of him, as you can tell if you're watching this video, so he's only been doing it for about 5 years. Bless him. But look, in 2016, Bill's company, Nico Property, was acquired by ASX-listed property portal. And in 2018, Bill was appointed Group CEO and later Executive Director. He's then gone and basically taken it back over, having seen a 500% increase in its popularity financially and in terms of share price. And he's also then moved to ASX-listed PropTech Group, where his team increased cash receipts by 136% year on year to over $20 million at its peak. Now, team, a lot of people that have been on this podcast up to this stage have been tremendous thought leaders, have been incredibly successful in the fields that they've been in. Bill's got receipts for some serious financial success with respect to what he's been involved in, and he knows, because he's seen it, he's done it, he's got the t-shirt on it, with respect to what success looks like in a financial world and in a financial respect. Bill, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on, man. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Thanks, mate. That's a big wrap. I hope I live up to it, but I'm really good, man. I'm really good. Excited to chat to you.
Oh, look, the pleasure's all mine, man. I'm really keen on having you on the show for a couple of reasons, because we've been going a bit more down a bit more of an EQ path, but your experiences and because now you do a lot of consultancy work for a lot of small businesses, you do a lot of coaching in that business leadership space, as well as, doing your own thing again now with Bond Conveyancing, where you're obviously a director in that operation, which is rapidly on the rise as well, with one or two mutual friends of ours. So man, before we crack on though, and I really dig into your experience and your perspectives around success, give everybody a little quick MO as to your journey and what got you to this stage.
Yeah, I've got a typical entrepreneur journey. Started a lot of businesses young, failed, at them, and then started getting better at them as I failed less and less. But I learned at a pretty early age that I love to grow things. I love to grow businesses, teams, individuals, even vegetables sometimes, mate. But not that often anymore. But I love to grow businesses mostly. And I when I first started in business, I was in finance, and everyone thought I was like a finance guy. And then I got into property, and people thought I was a property guy. And then I got into software, and everyone thought I was a software guy. But really, I'm none of those. I'm a builder. I just love building things. And now I'm definitely not a lawyer, let me tell you. But we've grown a very fast growth national digital law firm as well. So if I had to encapsulate it into one thing, I just love to grow things, and businesses being sort of my target.
It's really interesting that you say that, man, because I often get a lot of people say a similar remark to me in respect of, geez, you do all these different things. Like, why, how do you do so many things? And realistically, and I've only really come to understand this about myself relatively recently, actually, where for the likes of you and I, we do one thing, we just apply it in different ways, right?
Yeah.
But to us, it's pretty straightforward. But to everybody else, they see all this plethora of stuff and go, "Wow, you do all these different things. Do you even have a life? Do you da 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 da?" But I think that's probably the first thing for your notes, gang, is Bill, over the course of his success over his career in different fields, he's just been applying the one thing that he's designed to do into different things. And to Bill, it's the same shit. It's just interpreted in different channels, right? Which is makes life so much more simple, doesn't it? And I bet you will see that from a leadership point when you're trying to help business leaders and coaches and so on, and you're coaching them and that, you would notice that so many of them try to wear too many hats when just the one would do just fine, right?
Yeah. And I think people put too much stock in being a specialist. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to be a software engineer, you got to be a specialist. If you want to be a lawyer, you got to be a specialist. But, running those businesses, it's taken me on average about 3 to 6 months of really hard work and, listening to a lot of podcasts, reading a lot, subscribing to every newsletter possible just to learn about an industry. But I typically find in 3 to 6 months, at least from a commercial business standpoint, I know everything I need to know on any new business. I'm not saying I'm going to be then, be a lawyer or be a software engineer, but I know from a business perspective how to run those businesses and how to find success. And sometimes I think, that outside looking in factor has a positive as well, right? Because you don't think about what you know. I know this term's overused now, but this first principles type thinking, you don't know any better. So you just think of your own way to do something. And sometimes no one's thought of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is such a thing as being sort of pigeonholed in one's thinking when you're working in within an industry, even if you work in different operations within the same industry. There's always a different perspective that can add a new shade to something, right? And I really like what you just said then about being able to just take what it is that you do know and bring value through that, as opposed to trying to be something you're not, which I think is really great. Now, the specialist thing I want to dig into in a sec, because I think that relates to a lot of people's identity, and I think there's a personal, professional connection there. Before we crack on, though, I need to get your definition. Now, we do believe here at Success Curious that it involves connection, influence, and happiness, and that, along with success, all live in a little ecosystem where one can't survive without the other. Bill Nikolouszakis. Nailed it now. What is your definition of a successful human?
Now, I prepared for this, mate, because I knew you were going to ask. I watched a couple of the episodes before. I'm gonna have my own 3 things. I know you've got 3 things. The first one is just I think that being just really authentically yourself. Going back to that, no one can be you as well as you can be you. And I think over the years I've learned that the more I leaned into who I am as a person, the more value I've been able to add to others. There's a term that I use a lot in business, and that's the second one is ultimate responsibility, which basically means that anything that goes wrong in the business is your responsibility. That taking ownership, and that's a big one for me especially when you're in a management position, any management position, even middle management all the way up. And then the last one, which I've learned more in recent years, is the right thing and the nice thing are not the same thing. Doing the right thing is sometimes isn't the nice thing, and those 3 sort of things that have sort of brought me into that high performance range that I'm in. When I get into that range, they're the 3 things that work well for me.
Now, just on that last one, I wouldn't mind digging into that one a little bit first before we go back to that identity piece and specialist versus generalist sort of stuff. We say that the right thing isn't always the nice thing. Just dig on that a little bit. Just dig into that just a tiny bit, because I think for a lot of people that are listening to the show, sometimes the thing that's holding them back is the painful thing that they know that they need to do, or they know is the right thing to do, but they know it's going to cause a short-term pain. Now, this can be applicable to business. It can be applicable to relationships, whatever the case may be. But just dig into this a little bit more, man, because I reckon that is something that so many people know but don't execute on.
And I was the same for years, mate. Honestly, it was probably one of my biggest weaknesses was I was always trying to be nice. And what happens if you try to be nice, if that's your goal, is that you're doing the wrong thing by some people. So an example might be, having a tough conversation that'll make someone improve a part of their work, where they become much better at that piece. Or it might even be the extreme of letting someone go in a role where they're not suited so that they can go find what they're really good at elsewhere. I've been fired before early in my career, and everyone probably at some point, if they're really pushing the envelope, doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that you probably haven't found your sweet spot. But just having those difficult conversations have always brought out the right outcomes. But the key is doing them in a respectful way with the outcome in mind, not getting personal, right? It's about, if when I say doing the right thing, not the nice thing, it doesn't mean you can be a prick, It means that you do the right thing. It's the right thing because you think it's going to be a better outcome for them in the business, right? Rather than just being nice and telling someone they're doing a great job when maybe they're not, helping them through it.
I've had this conversation with a couple of people a few people at the minute. I think there's it's been an interesting little landscape when I've been talking to some business owners, and they know what they need to do. It's just not happening. And then as a result, they end up suffering themselves in a big, big way, whether it is shortfall in business operations, whether it is letdowns from a staffing point of view, whatever the case may be, right? And the short-term avoidance really does create huge long-term ramifications. And it's always because, yes, lots of arseholes own businesses and they make loads and loads of money, and good on them, and they don't give a stuff. But for a lot of people, and for many people, most people that be listening to this podcast, I'm sure, they don't like being not nice, right? They would, and it's always hard. It's always hard to do the right thing. Like sometimes, like it can be really, really challenging. Even if the right thing is a nice thing to do, and you might think that that's easy, but even then it still needs to be executed on. And a lot of people tend to just, the right thing is never, it's for some reason, we have this innate ability to try and avoid doing the right thing on more than one occasion. And it's just really interesting that you put that one in there. Now, I want to dig into this specialist versus generalist thing, because I actually think that, and this is definitely not on the agenda, but I think this is going to be really important because I know that I've had my challenges with this personally, where it's not me wanting, it's almost me sort of trying to fight owning what I know in trying to be all things to all people, right? And so this is a bit of a two-way conversation, because the way that you sort of put it, which is absolutely fair, is everybody's obsessed with trying to be claiming to be a specialist, but it's okay to just own your skill set and apply it in different ways, as opposed to just drilling into one specific channel. But the thing I want to ask you about this is, so many people attach their identity to their work, right? And as a result of that, a lot of people feel that need for validation when it comes to the specializing of something, or being known as or referred to as a specialist in something. Talk to me about your initial thoughts around this generalist versus specialist, and then how that is related to yourself. So, where you've either struggled to find identity, or how it's helped you to find identity.
Yeah, I think I guess my view on specialist versus generalist is that you can be successful being either. If I was in services, if I was a mortgage broker, if I was a financial advisor, I would want to be a specialist. I would want to say I'm a mortgage broker for this segment of the market, right? Mm-hmm. But as a human being, as an individual, I personally don't think you need to be pigeonholed into an industry or into a specific segment of the your audience or market or anything like that. I mean, I know that what brought me a lot of success was just believing in myself, and that happened by accident. Honestly, it's I always looked at I always worked in small business, and I looked at big businesses as these really smart people that had degrees, and I never went to uni, and all these types of things. And then I sat in my first board meeting for an ASX listed company when I sold my business to them, and I remember thinking to myself, oh shit, these people aren't that much smarter. Like, they're just normal people with a fancy title. And actually, what I found, there's really smart people in corporate, really smart, but there's a lot of really smart people that run small businesses as well. And it's a different skill set. They use some different words, right? But so I think, being a specialist for me is, I'm a specialist as well. I'm a specialist in building things, but I'm not a specialist in property or in finance or in, whatever industry someone wants to pigeonhole me in. And I think when I work that out about myself, is that what I really love is not property or is not finance, is I don't really love any of those things more than the other. What I love is growing businesses. And I think that goes back to your psyche, or your mentality of it, being a specialist and getting identity from it. When I sort of worked that out in my head, I loved that identity of myself. I loved that vision of me, and I loved looking in the mirror as someone that builds things. That made me feel better, and it made me motivated to do it more.
So you can almost say, right, that you're a specialist, but you apply your specialist topic or your specialist field, you apply it in a general way. And I think that's something that a lot of people they could do, but because they perhaps attach their identity to their role quite badly or quite significantly, they don't sort of see the wood for the trees. I was having a chat with someone who is sort of not disillusioned, but isn't happy in the industry that they are in, and and in that conversation, well, do you not see how your skills could be applied elsewhere, or what you are really good at could be applied elsewhere? And it wasn't really a thought that had occurred to them, and it made me sort of think after I had that conversation, it made me sort of think, oh, geez, I wonder how many people feel trapped by a uh, an imaginary box, or feel trapped by the conditioning that they brought onto themselves. Now, and on that, so when was it, right, that you first really realized? Was it that first board meeting, or was it when you tried something completely out of the box? You went from one industry to another industry. What was it that made you think, you know what, I can apply this? What was it that you recognized, or did somebody recognize it in you?
No, I think it's something I recognized, and I'll take this to the ridiculous. I used to, when I was young, I used to think I was going to be a professional soccer player. I was convinced. I trained day and night. And when I was about 19, I've said this story before, but I was sitting on the bench of this local team, and I remember thinking to myself, I can't even get into this team. I'm never going to play in Europe. And that was the day I pretty much quit soccer. About a year later, I quit. But about 20 years old, my career ended because I quit, and I started in business. And I used a lot of the principles I had learned to get not even successful, but semi-successful in soccer. To use that in business, things like believing in yourself, working hard, and knowing who's a good operator and staying close to them and learning from them. All these principles, and then I took them into business, and I got stuck in a rut again where I became this property kind of specialist, and because I used to do a lot of research, people thought of me as this property guy, and that way, then I sort of thought myself as that, and then when I first had that realization that actually I could do different things, because I used to call it the golden handcuffs. I used to think I know too much about property now. If I move into a different industry, I'm not going to be able to live the lifestyle I want to live, and I've got kids and a family and all that kind of stuff. But what I learned was that you got more skills than just the industry you're in. A lot of skills are transferable. In fact, if you're willing to learn and adapt, most of your skills are transferable. And I've had a few moments, that sitting on that bench in soccer, in the boardroom, there's been a few moments in my life where I've felt that, I can do different things to what I pigeonholed myself and others pigeonholed me into.
You use the word adaptable, which I think is a really, really cool word. And I think I'd like to dig into that a little bit. In the very first episode of this podcast, Sam McLean talked about IQ, EQ, and AQ now, which is becoming increasingly important, the adaptability quotient, right? And how important, I mean, it's obviously been important for you personally, but in today's, arena for success and what have you, in personal or business or professional, with the pace of the world as it is, how important is it for business leaders, for leaders of any kind, to have the ability to adapt?
Yeah, I think it used to be, if you're adaptable, you're ahead of others. But I think it's gone to adapt or die now. The world is changing quicker than it ever has been, and if you listen to anyone that knows these things very well, with the advent of AI, it's going to be a bigger change to the way we do business than the internet was. And that was a very big change, right? So I think being adaptable not only to those types of things, technologies and the like, but also just to processes. I always say the way you manage a team when the industrial age was afoot, and if one person was late to their 8 o'clock start time, the whole production line stopped. So they had really strict labor, your sort of management techniques where, if you got home, you got in a minute late, you basically stopped the whole production line. So people got in big trouble. But today's day and age, with the millennials being a major part of the workforce, I think the biggest group in the workforce now, we need to manage people differently. So you got to adapt that way. And in fact, I'm not young anymore. I'm 43 years old. And in fact, I don't want to, I'm one of the things I'm fearful of in business is that I get left behind, that I start thinking like those 50, 60-year-old guys when I was 20, and I used to look at them like I was a dinosaur. I don't want to think like that. And I go to the point where, I use social media a lot to follow a lot of young business people and see what they're doing. And, like with anything, mate, I take in what I want to take in. I don't do everything they do or listen to everything they say, but, it's really interesting to see, how things are changing. And I think it's a mentality. Like, you have to be adaptable. You have to be willing to, to do things differently and prove to yourself that you were wrong in the past and be comfortable with that.
Now, you segue me in wonderfully well here, by the way. You're doing a cracking job of segueing me into from one thing to another. The next thing
I've seen
that
your
I want
notes,
to
mate.
talk.
I've seen your notes.
Oh, I love it, man. This is awesome. You come on to this more often. So one thing that I did want to talk about with you were the sort of intangibles that you've noticed in people that have been successful in a business landscape. You mentioned there how you do a lot of observation around some of the younger talent that's coming through, right? What they're doing and so on and so forth. But as someone of your experience, you would absolutely be able to identify key things in each of these up and coming operators, and with people that you're working with now, with your coaching, your consulting, and all that sort of stuff. You'll notice that there are key traits. Now, there's obviously some standard ones, like hard work and consistency and what have you. But if we could try and think outside of the square, is there is there a couple of intangibles that you've noticed over your trip that has been relatively common within a lot of these people that have drawn success towards themselves?
Um, I think the biggest one for me is just having a growth mindset, not being fixed in the way that they do things. So, always being willing, always being able to learn and being curious. Your podcast is a really big one. That's part of having a growth mindset. But the people that I've seen succeed are people that are willing to learn and grow and be better, and they actively try and be. Anyone that says this is the way I've done it and it worked, or this is the way we used to do it, these are all red flags for me. In fact, I'll take someone with a growth mindset and high motivation over experience any day of the week in most roles.
Right, interesting, because it's almost becoming it's becoming quite a common argument between generations, right? Where people there's boomers and some of the Gen Xers that are starting to really get a little bit peeved at the fact that younger generations are starting to completely discount experience as something that is worthwhile and viable. Because why do we need experience? We've got AI, we've got technology, we've got all this sort of stuff. Why would we need that experience that they've had over the years? But having said that, though, even though you mentioned then that you'd rather take a growth mindset and the right energy over experience, I'm sure that you would have seen a lot of younger people that have tried these things, and you probably would have done it yourself, right? You mentioned you had a fair few failures over the journey, where if we had listened to that experience, we could have bloody saved ourselves, huh?
Yeah, I hate sport analogies in business, but I'll use one here. It's you can't have all inexperience, right? The only way the inexperience works is if there's some experienced people that can show them the way, right? Like in a soccer team, they got usually a spine of experienced players down the middle, and then they've got these kids on the side that are flamboyant and learning new things and trying all these different tricks, right? This is a similar thing in business. I think you can't just have all inexperienced people with high energy, or experienced people with no room for growth. It's got to be a balance. But growing businesses that aren't technical. So we need experienced lawyers in our law firm. That's 100% certain. But but we also need conveyancers that are willing to learn and adapt and use our technology and all those types of things as well. And know how to ask questions, when to do their own research. This is all things that experience isn't really relevant. Can you in a lot of the industries now, including ours, you can find a lot of answers. You don't need to ask someone, right? If you're proactive about it, whether you're using AI or Google or search functionality in PDFs or whatever it might be, you're going to find a lot of answers. So being curious and having that growth mindset is really important. But like a football team, you need to have that splattering of experience too to guide them.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on in what you were saying before, you used the words actively try. And I think a lot of people talk a great game, but again, that step, that jump from thinking to doing or talking to acting, I think is something that, and I do see this on a mountain of occasions where there's people that would be so up and about and energetic and enthusiastic, and you leave them thinking, wow, like these guys are just going to go set the world on fire and it's going to be incredible and all this sort of jazz. And then 6 months later, they're saying the same shit in the same energy, going and have got no further ahead. Like, talk to me about that a little bit, because you would have seen a lot of pretenders. Let's call them pretenders, for want of a better word, right? Um, and and it's very, very easy to pretend in these days, right? And a lot of people have become, and this is something that's another thing that is kind of hand in hand to a degree. I think too many people have become too comfortable with failing, you know? So now, first, so take this into two parts. Firstly, how do you help business owners get out of their own way and try new things? Like, what's the sort of steps that you help them take? Because a lot of the time, fear of losing income based on change is obviously a massive thing for small businesses. But secondary to that is, how do you spot the pretenders?
Yeah, so I think what you call pretenders is there's two buckets. I think for those there is the what you rightly call pretenders, people that talk a big game, but it is just all talk. And then there's probably other people that actually are pretty motivated, but maybe they just haven't got the emotional maturity to translate that energy into consistent behaviors, right? Because energy is one thing, consistent behaviors is with energy is a whole different thing. If you're just got a lot of energy and you're running around, busy, but not really actively doing things that are of value, that can happen. And people need guidance. So that's that part of it done. And what was the second part of the question?
So the second part of the question was, how do you help people to go from talking to doing? And especially because a lot of small business owners or people that are really fearing that risk of what failure could cost them, right? So how do you help them to navigate that fear of change?
Yeah, so I'll take a bit technically, then I'll the mindset, look at the mindset thing. So
Yeah,
first of
yeah.
all, anytime you want to change in business, you don't just make a radical change based on a hypothesis. You have to test and learn. So yeah, and often what I find is if I've got a really good what I think is a really good idea, I'll workshop it with other people that I trust, and it'll change a little bit. And then I'll put it into practice in a small way and I'll test and learn, and then it'll change again. And sometimes the great idea that you had is almost unrecognizable by the end, but you've come up with something way better. So testing and learning is really important. So the first thing I look at with businesses is, do you know your numbers? What are your key metrics? What's important in your business? So that when we test something, let's say we wanted to make a change because things aren't going great or you want things to go better. If you make that change, how are we going to know whether it's working or not? I think that's first thing. And the mindset shift is a whole different equation, because I think, and doing coaching consulting the last couple of years has taught me this, is you can't force someone. You can't force someone to want to be better and to want to change. And just because they get a business coach, that's a good step, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're willing to do what needs to be done to change. And sometimes, sometimes you do need to burn the boats, right? We've all heard that saying before. Sometimes you got to say, things are going really badly and I need to go all in on a different strategy, or even things aren't going badly, but the world's changing, and think Apple with the iPod and the iPhone, right? They basically burnt their own business by releasing an iPhone when the iPod was selling crazily. So there might be that circumstance where there's something coming, and you're going to have to burn the boats to make that that move that you got no return on, and all I can say is that if you do that, be sure around your numbers. But it is a mindset shift that has to happen. And one thing about being a business owner or being an entrepreneur is there is risk associated with every single business and every single decision you make. There's opportunities. A lot of my businesses have been very close to fate. Even the ones that have succeeded have had periods in them where we almost went broke. So there's there is inherent risk in business, and if you haven't got the stomach for it, then I would question whether you are suitable to grow a growth business. If you're going to be like a mortgage broker and you just wanted to do a couple of mil a month, that's kind of like being an employee. And going a bit off topic, mate, but I think there's a really big distinction between being self-employed and being a business owner. All right, two different types of people. Self-employed is basically an employee that works for themselves. Business owner is someone that's trying to grow something. They've got employees, they're building a business. And I think in that mindset, you have to have the right mindset to be able to shift and to be able to make those changes and take calculated risks.
Yeah. And when it comes to those calculated risks, I mean, ultimately, you do your homework, you test and learn, but ultimately at some stage, there's got to be a bit of a leap of faith, right? There's no absolutes, right? So talk to me about a time when your faith, you mentioned there that you had a couple of times where you nearly went belly up. Talk to me about how you managed to get yourself through a time where your faith was severely tested, right? Because there's plenty of people that will be on a particular path and it looks like there's something happening there, but then they get tempted by a short-term win, whether it is a role at a different firm or whether it is a quick cash business opportunity that short-term is great, but long-term is going to be a pain in the bum. Talk to me about a time where you've had your faith sort of really tested.
Yeah, the one time that sticks out the most that we probably did the biggest sort of what I call a model pivot was in my time in my first successful business, Niko Property, which I sold to the ASX listed company. That business, we used to do property research. And in the first year, I owned the business 100% myself in the first year, and then I brought a business partner on. But at the start, we used to sell these research reports. And these research reports were really valuable, and property developers loved them because they helped them sell their projects. So basically, the research report was all the positive things about the location, the property, the project, and why people should buy it. So as opposed to a brochure, it was more research-focused, data-backed. And it worked really well. The problem was that no matter how much we sort of priced these things higher, there was a ceiling on the price that developers would pay, and only so many new developments that would want these documents. And what we looked at was the people that were buying these were developers and real estate agents, and the real estate agents were making $20,000-$30,000 on each property that was sold. We made, $10,000-$15,000 in the whole project for a report. And we thought, well, we're doing all the hard work of setting this up in a way where they can be sold. Why don't we go and find the agents that actually sell it? So effectively what we did is we said to developers, these are no longer for sale, these reports. But what we will do is we'll take your project on exclusively, and we'll find agents that will use these reports and sell it for you. And it became a research company to a real estate agency. I wasn't a licensed real estate agent. I had to bring on a business partner that was a real estate agent who knew how to sell property because I had no idea how to. So effectively, we jumped the whole model. And the reason we did that was because our initial premise of selling these reports didn't work. I mean, it worked in that people liked the reports and they were buying them, but there was just nowhere near a big enough market. And if I was starting that business now, I never would have started it because I would have done more market research. But yeah, at the time we had to make a massive change in the model from selling reports to being a real estate agent effectively, and we sort of cannibalized our own business to start a new one. That was done in the spirit of survival. So that wasn't like hey, I want to try something out because it's new and shiny. That was a survival story, and we were down to literally, did the last few dollars when we took our first exclusive project. True story. Like the agents were telling us they're going to lock the doors in our office, and like because we hadn't paid the rent. It was that kind of story. But we got our first exclusive project, made more money than we made the whole year before in that one project, and the rest is history, right? But that took a big leap of faith. But it was done from a position of survival. So, I think it'd be even harder if things were going okay. Okay's the worst thing. If it was going really bad or really good, it's great. I think just doing okay is actually the worst place to be.
Yeah, when you're coasting, and then you just seem to be not going anywhere fast, but you're not going backwards fast either.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really good point, actually. We tend to get comfortable in the mediocrity, right? We tend to get very, very comfortable in that sort of coasty phase where we're not testing ourselves, but we're not being tested quite as much as what we could be.
And it makes it harder to do something different, right? Because things are going okay. So you're not forced to make change, and making change when you're not forced to, getting out of your comfort zone, can be difficult.
100%. 100%. Now, when it comes to that serious test of faith and what have you, and you're back to the wall and all that sort of thing, what do you think it was? What do you think it was that really got you through?
I don't think it's one thing. I think I've always been super resilient. Like, I don't back down from things. I'll face things head on. And I like a lot of people, I think I work best when back's to the wall. That's when I feel like I'm at my best, when there's a big deadline coming. If things are going really well, I try and manufacture things that will press me, because that's how it worked best. So I think that's one thing. Just being resilient is so important in those situations, and being able to get through. And I think, I don't know if it's an inherent thing or whether it's something that was learned, playing sport, being rejected a lot in sport, bouncing back, maybe that's part of it. I guess you see a lot of people that are really successful that have been in the army, for instance, because, they're resilient people. I think that's a very, very underrated quality. And if you speak to a lot of the really, really highly successful people, way more than we're talking a global level, they talk a lot about resilience.
It's massive. How do you think, because for a lot of people, and especially the way that the world is now, where accessibility to things has never been easier, really. And so therefore the ability to build a level of resilience, which back in the day would have been natural, it would have been a natural occurrence thing, right? Whereas now there's a fairly decent soft underbelly of society where there is a lack of resilience. How do you think, and we're going off piste a little bit here, but how do you think we can, as business owners or whatever, how do you think as business owners we can develop that degree of resilience, right? Because it's something that even if we don't need it now, we're going to need it at some point. And I believe that one of the biggest factors as to why so many people struggle to take this leap of faith is because they haven't got that sense of resilience in them to be able to withstand whatever could come their way on the other side, right?
Yeah, look, I can only speak for myself, and the resilience was born out of circumstance. Bad things happened, I got through them. Then months later, maybe years later, I thought, hey, I did that. I got out of that situation, and I'm better for it today. If that happens a bunch of times, suddenly you start believing when bad things happen that this is just a phase. I know I'm going to get through it. I've got the right, being completely upfront. I think a lot of people in business are this way. I went through really bad mental struggles the first couple of times it happened, serious things. And then now when bad things happen, I'm far more resilient. I know how to handle myself emotionally better, how to control my emotions. I know when I'm feeling certain ways and how to deal with that because I've been through it. So I'm not sure you can just, there's a book to read that will help you with resilience. I think it's just learned behaviors from going through difficult things and getting through them. And I think if you haven't been through difficult things and you want to be resilient, then try and learn from others. Look at the most successful people in the world. Forget about me, the Elon Musk of the world that, he's gone through massive, massive challenges and got through it to be successful. Every successful person I know has been through major challenges. A lot of people have gone through mental struggles because of those challenges. I've struggled to find one that hasn't, of my friends that are successful, that are people outside, we'll call them successful, that haven't gone through some kind of mental struggle. So I think, it's a crappy way to look at it, but I think you just have to be able to, if you want to be successful, you have to be willing to get through those stages.
Oh, I could not agree more. And it's a shame that we can't just bottle this resilience thing up and just sell it as a magical sort of solution, right? And it is frustrating. I've sort of asked this question of a couple of people quite recently, where um, what is it that why can't we just bottle it? So why do we have to face such adversity in order to generate these things that set us up for a much better path down the track, right? Like why do we have to go through the fire in order to gain these things out of the back end? But you're absolutely spot on. It a lot of the time, and I think one thing that we could all do is just learn to try things that we're bad at, right? Or even if it's just playful to begin with, right? And you see it in with kids. They're trying stuff, and you can see that there is a resilience building in them, because they might find it really difficult to shoot that basket, or they might find it really difficult to finish that dance move or whatever. But it's very quickly forgotten about when we become an adult, because of the fact that we get into the daily grind of paying checks and paying bills and all that sort of stuff. We sort of forget to keep pushing our boundaries of from within ourselves, right? And you must see that in so many businesses, especially some of the longer term sort of small businesses that have been around for a little while. That that blanket of comfort that they have, because they're not going anywhere fast,
Yeah.
it can be really, really difficult to get rid of, right?
Yeah, I don't have a direct answer for this, but it's a concern that I've had not only in business, but taking it off topic. I've got a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old daughter, and their life has been far easier than mine, and my life was far easier than my parents. So no judgments. But one of the big things is I don't want them to become too soft and entitled. I don't want them to have
Yeah.
difficult life, but I don't want them to not be able to deal with stuff when I'm not, living with me and relying on me anymore. So how do you? So I've thought about a lot about how can I build resilience in them. So
Mm.
getting them, like, they're in sport now, and even though I've got no sort of, I'm not one of those dads that really wants to be successful. I always say to them, everything that they do, you should want to be the best. You might
Yep.
not be, and you might fail, and you might get rejected. But if you're going to do something, you may as well try and be the best at it. And I guess my idea with that is that I hope that they try, and I hope that some things don't work out for them and they fail, and then they build a bit of resilience, almost manufactured. Whereas we probably got some had to build some resilience in our younger life a little bit more naturally. Trying to manufacture hard things, and even things like as I get older, I was really fit young, got really unfit for 15 years, and just the last couple of years started getting fit again, and just what I found is just doing difficult things like going to the gym, waking up early, doing those things, just it builds good habits and good resilience. So I guess it's not a way to manufacture it, but I would say if your life's easy, just try and do hard things.
And it's one of those, you said there that, um, you know, getting fit and going to the gym again and doing things like that can help you to, good habits. But we've always often talked about good habits. Habits is something that comes out heaps, like in conversations around setting yourself good habits and all that sort of stuff. But I think that what we perhaps need to focus on as well, because the habit conversation, it's starting to get a little bit white noise with respect to loads of people talking about it. But I think we perhaps need to take the conversation on that a little bit further and say, right, what is it that these good habits are helping to instill in you? What are the characteristics that this habit is providing for you moving forward? And perhaps provide that little bit of extra incentive to bring on, grow, and maintain a habit, as opposed to just having a habit for the sake of having a habit because you were told that it was a good habit to have.
Yeah.
Understanding what it is that it builds within you, right?
The other thing is, habits that are bad, right? Or what you think might be a good habit and ends up, being negative. I think for me, I split it into two camps. I think in your personal life, habits are great. For instance, for me, Waking up earlier means I'm less likely to have that fourth glass of wine when I'm out for dinner, a business dinner or something, and then be tired the next day because I know I've got to be up. So those kind of habits are good for me. Now, waking up early is a really good habit for me because it sets the right behaviors. I know that if I have to get up early, I have to do certain things. But I've got to say that I'm not you'd be probably surprised to hear, and a lot of people that I've seen that in my world that have been successful. I'm not super structured or with habits at work. Like I time block. I've got certain things that I do in certain days to make sure that I'm getting everything done, but I don't have these habits of I'm going to do all my important meetings first, then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to, you hear about these, these things, or you hear about people that have this really amazing morning routine. Yeah, that's just not me, and I've found a sweet spot in the habits that work for me, even to the point where I think each individual is different. And what I learned very early on was I used to think that I work best, or everyone. I used to think everyone's the same, and business is a marathon, right? So you got to work consistently every day, and then what I actually learned was that I'm not a marathon runner. I'm a sprinter. Like I can do 3 months of 12, 14-hour days, no problem at all. But then I need like a week, right? I need a week of a holiday in the sun, or even just not much work and hanging out with the kids, or, whatever it is. And then I can go hard again for 3 months. Whereas other people I know are just really consistent, and that works for them. So habit might not be, the what you're journaling at 6 a.m. and whatever. It's just that what works for you. And for me, that made a massive difference to me. I suffered pretty bad burnout doing it the other way. Now I don't get burnt out because, I know I'm good at sprinting, and I know that I've got that break coming.
Yeah, and it's a really, really good point, man, to be honest, because I think so many people, because of their struggle to find their own identity, they tend to latch on to a success formula from someone that they saw on Instagram, right? And thinking that that's going to be the solution for them, when the reality is, because we're all wired differently, we've all got different lifestyles and different work styles and different work patterns and all this sort of stuff. It really is more of a case of all these things are good for some, they can be great for anyone, but it has to be in from the viewpoint of your own identity. And it's okay to say that, nah, this doesn't work for me, but if I modify it this way, then it could.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to my answer to your first question about being a successful human, about just really understanding who you are personally, living that authentically. And for me, there's certain things that I am that normally what you'd think a successful person is. Like I'm not a morning person. When I say get up early, that's 7:30. Some people might think that when I said that 5 a.m. or something, but getting up early for me is 7:30. If I do that, I know that, or 7:15, by 7:30, I'm on my laptop. Then I do an hour and a half of hard work. Then I go to the gym, and then I come back and work the rest of the day till whatever time I need to work to finish. I haven't got an end time. I haven't got none of that. Just, there might be cooking the kid dinners in between and then working again later, but I just do what needs to be done. So, I think that's authentically who I am. Other people might be really good to be structured, journal at 5 a.m., 5:30, read the Bible, whatever they do. But for me, that doesn't work, right? That's just not who I am. Yeah.
And I think we all need to own that, right? And it sort of ties in with that second one that you said about ultimate responsibility. Just be accountable to who you are and what works for you. And then make all of this stuff, take a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, stick it together and put it into the formula that works for you. And then it's gonna feel you're gonna be more incentivized to do that more often if it feels like it is actually suited to who you are and how you operate, right? I think
Yeah.
that's such a really, really good point that it doesn't get brought up enough is, and because a lot of these people that peddle all these things, they have to sell it as a success formula, right? They have to sell it like that because
Yeah.
otherwise no one would buy it. If they just said,
Yeah.
"Look, it might work for some of you, it might not work for some of you." Of course, they're not going to say that. But I think the reality is that a lot of people, because they either might be desperate and they're just desperate for some sort of answer or whatever the case may be, like they'll cling on to any sort of semblance of hope, when if they can just slow themselves down for a minute, right? When they just slow themselves down for a minute, then hopefully they'll be able to pick the bits that work for them the best. And that can be applied to business ownership as well. There's all these different ways that people come into organizations, but I suspect that your coaching style, your consulting style is very much one of, right, let's find out what works for you, right?
Yeah, yeah, and being self-aware is a big one, right? Like, and again, so what makes a successful business person? When I'm coaching clients, I think them being self-aware, is a really really big one, and I think part of when I became more focused and better sort of mentally and perform better in my business is because when I became a lot more self-aware about who I am and not trying to pigeonhole myself into this idea about what I think a successful business person looks like.
Mm. I think that's a really good way to bring this episode to a head. And I think it's something that we all need to marinate on and write down in our notes, like all these things that we've been getting drilled by various influencers of various types. And we take this on and we take that on and we try a 4-hour work week and we try this and we try that and we try the other. And because none of them work in totality, we tend to ditch them really fast. Maybe we need to revisit some of these things and go, right, which bits worked and which bits didn't. Take
Yeah,
the bits that worked and ditch the bits that didn't. And look at creating your own success formula that works in your own mind. And to sound cliche about it, just be curious about which elements could work. Now, there might be one formula that just works to a T, and that's wonderful. But if it's not, if it doesn't, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, is what we're trying to say here. Just select the things that work for you to an extent, and then just remove the rest, and then find your own way about making this thing happen for you.
yeah, and
Bill, this has been such a cool chat, really, really cool chat, and I love the fact that um, we're seeing behind the curtain a little bit as to why you haven't managed to achieve the things that you've managed to achieve numerically, shall we call it. It's been really, really cool.
yes.
Matt, I want to ask you one last thing before I let you go, which is what we'll ask all of our guests, which is, what is the one thing that is you feel is missing from your game, or what do you think is the one thing that you really need to improve on in your game? Because you've got Bond Conveyancing, which is going bananas, and you guys have got some heady aspirations when it comes to that as well. But I'm sure you'll be ready to take on the next project in the next couple of years, and you might need to adapt yourselves to suit that. What is it you think in your game that you think you need to improve on the most?
Yeah, I think one thing that this goes for everyone, but for me especially, is consistency.
Mhm.
Just being more consistent in my behaviors and in what I do to get outcomes. I think like a lot of people, if when a lot of things get thrown at me and I've got a lot of things to do, I'm great. I'll just do them. It's easy for me. But I think that the hardest part is when you have to be creative and you have to think of things to do to be successful. In startup world, there's nothing to do. Like, like you haven't got that much to do, right? You got to make things. You got to like, what can I do today to make a difference? And
Yeah.
I try and ask myself that question every day. But just being more consistent with that, I think, is something that sort of shaped in my mind over the last sort of few months. Is just trying to be more consistent than I have been.
What do you think that is within you? What is it, do you think, that prevents you from being as consistent as you would like?
Uh, Speaking candidly, distractions.
Right.
When you're, I'm very hungry right now. I want success. I'm not. I don't feel like I've done anything. I feel like I really want to do things successfully, but also I'm not desperate. And sometimes it's harder. Well, I was younger, I was desperate to succeed. Whereas now I'm super hungry and I've got the formula. But I'm not coming from which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm not coming from an area of desperation. I'm coming from an area of really high need and want. So I think that's probably something that mentally I've got to get myself around. I've got to convince myself that being desperate is bad anyway, and being this way is better, and I just need to be a little bit more consistent in what I'm doing from that perspective. But yeah, I don't have the answer yet, but there's some of the things that are ruminating about how I can be more consistent.
Love it, man. I love it. Thank you so much for your candor. Really, really appreciate that. Look, a team, you need to follow this guy because he drops pearls of wisdom more regularly than most. He really, really does. And the way that he goes about it, Bill, you're one of these, and I say this entirely complimentarily. the way that you go about it is, you're not brash, you're not your stereotype in terms of common society perception of success, but the numbers don't lie. And that's what I really, really like about you, man, is the fact that you let a lot of the time you let your numbers do the talking for you, which I think is quite fantastic. And I think more people, if they'd have focused more on letting their wins talk for them, then they'd probably go get some more wins, right? As opposed to talking heaps about the one win that they got, right? So, man, I have so much respect for how you go about your game, man. I really, really respect it. I think you're an absolute credit to the business world, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, man. It's been a great chat. I really enjoyed it.
Hey, right then, team. I'm sure you got stacks of notes. I will put Bill's links into the show notes. Make damn sure you follow this guy because he is legit. Until next time, my friends, make sure you stay safe, healthy, happy, and we'll chat to you again on the next episode of Success Curious. Talk to you then, gang.